Have you ever wondered why some people seem to live surrounded by drama, as if they carry a magnet that attracts emotional vampires, manipulators, and all kinds of toxic people, while others walk through the same world, pass through the same streets, and coexist in the same environments, but remain almost invisible to this type of predator? Have you looked around, perhaps tired, exhausted from so much emotional wear, and thought, why does this always happen to me? Why do these people choose me as their target? If you are watching this video, it is very likely that you are tired of feeling drained, manipulated, or living at the mercy of the psychological games of people who seem to feed off your energy. Perhaps you are someone who always tries to keep the peace, who gives too much of yourself, who avoids conflicts, but ends up caught in the same vicious cycles of toxic relationships. And it may be that, deep down, you have started to think that the problem lies solely with you. Because today, I want you to listen to me until the end. Because what we are going to talk about here could turn a key inside you. Carl Jung, the founder of analytical psychology, discovered something that most people don't even imagine. It's not just about luck, fate, or bad luck. There is a deep, almost invisible mechanism that determines who will be pursued by toxic people and who will go unnoticed by them. And no, it's not because these people are stronger, tougher, or know how to assert themselves by shouting and fighting. It's something much quieter and, precisely for that reason, much more powerful. Because toxic people are like emotional predators. They sniff out the emotional wounds that you still carry open within yourself. They are experts at detecting vulnerabilities, insecurities, fears that you often try to hide. And that is what makes you visible to them. The secret to becoming psychologically inaccessible is not in fighting against these people. It's not in shouting, cutting off relationships, or building giant walls around you. The real secret lies in something that Jung called integrating your shadow. Today, I want to speak directly to you who are tired of feeling drained, of carrying weight that isn't yours, of living on the defensive. I want to show you that there is a way out, but it's not what most people teach out there. It's not enough to learn catchy phrases, self-affirmation techniques, or create lists of boundaries. You need to do something much deeper. You need to know and embrace the darkest parts of yourself, those that you may be ashamed to admit exist. Jung said that everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. And it is this understanding that changes everything. Because the moment you stop projecting your shadows onto others, toxic people simply stop seeing you as a target. It's as if you become invisible to them, not because you are hiding, but because you no longer have the emotional cracks through which they enter. So stay with me until the end of this video. Today, I will show you how to master this secret, not just so that toxic people stay away from you, but so that you finally become free. Free to live healthy relationships, free to walk in the world without fear, free to be yourself without carrying invisible chains. Because the secret was never to fight against toxicity. The secret has always been to transcend the need to be seen or validated by those who live in the shadows. Ready? Let's dive deep into this territory where few dare to tread. Carl Jung, in all his genius, dedicated a good part of his life to studying the invisible mechanisms that govern the human psyche. One of his most powerful discoveries was that unconscious patterns, often rooted in early experiences and unresolved emotional issues, can manifest as destructive behaviors in ourselves and others, even if they seem socially acceptable or are not overtly aggressive. That said, toxic people do not appear out of nowhere, nor do they choose their victims at random. They have an almost animal instinct for sniffing out what is wounded within us, as it resonates with the shadow and complexes within it. They perceive, without needing words, where you are vulnerable, where you hide fear, shame, or unmet needs. If you constantly find yourself caught up in dramas, in manipulative situations, in relationships where it seems you always have to prove your worth or defend your sanity, know that this does not happen because there is something wrong with you. It happens because, without realizing it, you are emitting subtle signals. Signals that tell the world, there is something in me that is still open, that still hurts. Jung called this projections. Everything you do not accept in yourself, everything you repress, transforms into a kind of energy that leaks into the world. Toxic people are like predators that smell this emotional blood. They approach those who are wounded because that is where they can exert power, control, and feed off the drama that consumes you from within. But Jung discovered something even more fascinating. When you integrate those aspects you have been trying to hide, your shadow, you create what he called psychic integrity. And psychic integrity is something almost palpable. It is like a vibrational frequency that repels those who are used to exploiting emotional gaps. Toxic people simply lose interest in those who do not react to their game, who do not show fear, who do not need approval or validation. People with psychic integrity do not live in war against others. They are not always armed, tense, waiting for the next attack. They live in a state of internal solidity. They know who they are, they know what they want, and most importantly, they know what they are not willing to tolerate. And this solidity is unconsciously perceived by those who feed off chaos. It is as if emotional predators begin to see these people as hard, smooth stones, where there is no place to sink their claws. Jung said that the shadow is a living part of the personality. Denying it does not make it disappear. It only turns it into weakness. But when you integrate it, when you acknowledge it, it becomes strength. It starts to work in your favor, creating an energy field that repels those who seek to exploit your insecurities. Perhaps you are thinking, but how do I do this? How do I integrate something I don't even know exists? This is where the real work begins, because psychic integrity is not something that is achieved with motivational phrases or by reading half a dozen self-help books. It is a deep, sometimes painful journey, but absolutely liberating. In the next section, I will guide you exactly into this territory. We will understand how to recognize the projections you make onto others and discover why what irritates or fascinates you most about toxic people is almost always a mirror of your own unhealed wounds. Are you ready to take this first step? Then let's move forward. If this content is making sense to you, click the subscribe button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support. Now we arrive at a place where almost no one wants to go, looking inward. Because it is much easier to blame the world outside, to point fingers at toxic people, to say that they are narcissists, they are emotional vampires, they are manipulators. All of this may even be true, but if it were just that, it would be enough to cut contact with these people, and that would be it. We would be saved. But reality is not that simple. You may have noticed that even when changing environments, jobs, or even cities, the pattern often repeats itself. You leave an abusive relationship and fall into another similar one. You escape a controlling boss and end up finding another. You distance yourself from a manipulative friend and suddenly someone similar appears in your life. Why does this happen? Carl Jung offers us a brutal yet liberating answer. What irritates or attracts us intensely in others is often a reflection of what we deny or repress within ourselves. This is what he called projection. Projection is when you take parts of yourself, parts that you cannot stand to see or admit, and stick them onto the image of another. Suddenly, that toxic person represents everything you hate or everything you secretly desire but are afraid to acknowledge. Think of someone who evokes anger, disgust, or even fascination in you. Ask yourself, what exactly bothers or attracts me so much about this person? Perhaps you hate their selfishness, authoritarianism, or manipulativeness. But if you look deeper, you may realize that there is a part of you that also wants to set boundaries, that also desires power, that also wants to be heard without having to ask for permission. Perhaps this part of you was repressed long ago, in childhood, when you were told that feeling anger was wrong, that wanting attention was ugly, that speaking your mind was dangerous. So you learned to bury those impulses. And every time you encounter someone who lives that shadow without guilt, an explosive reaction arises, hatred, repulsion, or even an irresistible attraction. Jung said that only with the transformation of the individual's attitude will the psychology of the nation begin to transform. What he means is that if you do not look inward, if you do not discover which of your wounds are open, you will continue to send signals to the world saying, here there is pain, here there is insecurity, here there is fear. And toxic people can smell that. They approach precisely where they sense vulnerability. Recognizing your projections is not easy. It is painful to admit that often what makes you a victim is also related to something within you. But it is precisely at this point that your power lies. When you ask yourself, with brutal honesty, what is this person reflecting in me? You begin to pull back that energy that was scattered throughout the world. You stop wasting strength trying to change others and start transforming it into self-knowledge. It is not about blaming yourself for the actions of toxic people. Far from it. But about understanding that you do not control who the world puts in your path. But you can control what you emit to the world. And when you stop projecting, you become inhospitable territory for emotional predators. They simply no longer see an opportunity to feed off you. But there is another fundamental step. Learning not to feed the game of toxic people. Ready to go even deeper? Then continue with me. Now that you have started to understand the projections you carry within yourself, we need to talk about something equally crucial: the drama. Because recognizing your shadows is the first step. But if you continue to feed the emotional game of toxic people, nothing will change. And perhaps this is one of the hardest truths to accept. Often, it is us who, without realizing it, provide exactly the nourishment that these emotional predators seek. Toxic people need something to survive. And it's not just your attention. They need your emotional energy. They feed off your fear, your anger, your insecurity, your resentment. Every outburst of yours, every attempt to convince them they are wrong, every heated speech or desperate cry. All of this is pure food for those who thrive on chaos. It's as if there is a dance. They provoke, you react. They throw out small emotional bait, a criticism, an irony, a punitive silence, a disguised accusation, and watch. When you bite the bait, when you lose control, they win. Because at that moment, it no longer matters who is right or wrong. The focus shifts to your emotional reaction. You become the problem. You become crazy, exaggerated, too sensitive, and worse still, you then feel guilty, exhausted, ashamed, while they walk away unscathed, often playing the victim. How many times have you found yourself trying to explain something rationally to someone who clearly doesn't want to understand? How many times have you tried to argue, prove your point, present facts, hoping that the person would finally open their eyes? And what happened? Nothing. Or worse, you left the dialogue even more confused, questioning whether you are indeed exaggerating. This is not a coincidence. Toxic people instinctively know how to mess with your perception of reality. They know that if they can throw you off balance, put you in an emotional state, they have already won half the battle. Jung teaches us that what you resist persists. When you react intensely, you are, in practice, giving more power to what you want to combat. You are saying, "This affects me deeply." And it is precisely this information that toxic people use against you. They map your emotional weaknesses, observe your triggers, and from there, keep you trapped in a web that seems impossible to break. So, what is the antidote? Neutrality. And here, do not confuse neutrality with weakness or passivity. Being neutral is not about swallowing everything silently or becoming a doormat. It is, in fact, a profound act of power. When you respond to provocations with serenity, with conscious silence, or simply refuse to engage in the game, you completely deflate the other person's emotional balloon. You take away the food from the hungry creature. Toxic people cannot stand those who do not react. They quickly lose interest when they realize they cannot destabilize you. And over time, they start to avoid you, because your presence becomes a constant reminder that they have no control over you. However, to reach this point, you need to master the art of controlling your reactions. And this is not easy, especially when we carry old wounds that surface in response to certain behaviors. That is why, in addition to recognizing your projections and stopping the feeding of the drama, there is another fundamental pillar in the integration of the shadow: the development of your internal boundaries. Boundaries are not just external barriers. They start within you. They determine what you accept or not emotionally. They shield you against emotional blackmail and subtle manipulations. And that is what we will talk about in the next part. Many people think that having boundaries means just learning to say no to others. But I will tell you a truth that no one shares. External boundaries are useless if you don't have internal boundaries. The true defense against toxic people starts within you. Toxic people do not only invade your schedule, your physical space, or your time. They primarily invade your mind. And they do this because they find open doors. These doors are your unresolved needs: the need to be accepted, the need to please, the need to prove you are right, the need to avoid conflict at all costs, the need to be seen as a good person. As long as these needs are screaming inside you, anyone can use them as levers to manipulate you. Carl Jung helps us understand why this happens. He said, "The shadow is a living part of the personality. As long as you do not integrate your shadow, it governs you from the unconscious." And do you know what one of the biggest shadows we carry is? The idea that we need to be loved by everyone, that we need to be seen as correct, fair, kind, polite people. And behind that, there is a deep fear: the fear of rejection, the fear of abandonment, the fear of being alone. Toxic people can smell this fear like sharks smell blood. They know that just threatening to withdraw affection, respect, or approval is enough to keep you trapped in their game. Sometimes they don't say anything directly. They just change their tone of voice, look away, fall silent, create that tense atmosphere in the air. And immediately, you find yourself trying to fix the situation, please, apologize, over-explain. And just like that, they regain power over you. Internal boundaries mean knowing deep down that you do not need anyone's approval to exist. They mean having absolute clarity about who you are, what you want, and what you will not tolerate. And most importantly, they mean knowing that you are willing to lose relationships, opportunities, or even the goodwill of others to remain true to yourself. This does not mean you need to live armed, distrustful, or isolated. On the contrary, when you have internal boundaries, you live with much more lightness. Because there is no longer a constant fear of losing others' acceptance. You know that, no matter what happens, you will be okay with yourself. And this energy of solidity becomes perceptible to everyone, including toxic people, who simply lose interest because there are no more hooks for them to hang on to. Internal boundaries also prevent you from falling into others' emotional games. When someone tries to provoke, manipulate, or test your weak points, you can observe the game without getting emotionally involved. You notice the maneuver, but you do not feel obligated to react. You maintain your peace because you know that that person's opinion or mood does not define who you are. But here is a hard truth. Developing internal boundaries requires courage. It requires facing the parts of yourself that still feel small, needy, desperate for acceptance. It requires sitting face to face with the fear of loneliness, the fear of judgment, the fear of being seen as selfish or cold. And only those willing to traverse this territory achieve real freedom. It is a process. No one wakes up overnight with unbreakable boundaries. But every time you choose to stay true to yourself, even if someone distances themselves or criticizes you, you reinforce those boundaries. And every time you do this, your energy changes. You begin to emit signals of psychic integrity. And, as we mentioned before, toxic people feel this immediately and prefer to look for another target. But there is still a crucial point in this journey, perhaps the deepest and most transformative of all. Because it is not enough to recognize your projections, stop feeding the drama, or build internal boundaries. You need to have the courage to face the darkest part that resides within you. Because as long as you continue to reject your own darkness, someone will always be able to use it against you. And that is what we will talk about in the next part. If what you're hearing resonates with you, you'll find real value in my ebooks. Beyond the Shadow breaks down Jung's core ideas, while Dialogues with the Unconscious gives you a 30-day path to apply them in your life. Both are linked in the pinned comment. Now we enter the darkest, and paradoxically, the most liberating territory of this entire journey, accepting your own darkness. Because up to this point, we have talked about projections, about stopping reactions, about internal boundaries. All of this is essential, but there is something that lies at the root of all vulnerability that attracts toxic people: the refusal to accept the darkest parts of our own soul. Carl Jung said, "To know your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darkness of others." And this is more than just a beautiful phrase. It is a powerful statement. Because everything you hide, everything you pretend doesn't exist, everything you find ugly, shameful, or unacceptable in yourself becomes a weapon that can, and will, be used against you. Let's be honest. We all have dark thoughts. We all feel envy, resentment, wounded pride. We have all felt the urge to hurt, manipulate, lie, or take revenge. But most of us bury these parts deep down, convinced that if no one knows, then they don't exist. But they do, and they remain alive, pulsating in the underground of the psyche, seeking ways to manifest. The problem is that the more you hide your shadow, the more it grows in the dark. And worse, the more vulnerable you become to those who can see your weaknesses. Toxic people have a radar for sensing where you are afraid. If you are someone who does everything to always appear good, always correct, always perfect, they will instinctively poke at the wounds that remind you that you are not so perfect after all. And then you lose control, react, try to prove otherwise, and fall back into the drama cycle. Integrating the shadow does not mean becoming a cruel, cold, or selfish person. It means recognizing that all these facets exist within you and learning to relate to them consciously. It means knowing that yes, you can feel anger, but you don't have to act on it. That yes, you can have dark thoughts, but that does not define who you are. It is when you accept that you have the capacity to be cruel, that you become genuinely compassionate because you choose to be so. It is when you recognize your own envy that you stop allowing it to corrode you. It is when you admit that there is a part of you that would like to have power or control that you stop falling into the game of those who try to dominate you. This process is not simple. It often hurts. Because it means tearing down the masks you have built over the years to be accepted, loved, admired. It means looking at impulses that you may judge as horrible. But Jung knew that the greatest danger is not in the shadow itself. It is in ignoring it. Because everything that remains unconscious drives your life, and you start to call it destiny. When you integrate your shadow, something extraordinary happens. You feel lighter. You stop fearing the judgment of others. Because nothing anyone says about you can deeply affect you. You already know your own demons. And this creates a psychic freedom that toxic people simply cannot stand. They feed on your fear, your shame, your need to hide who you are. When they realize that you have nothing left to hide, they completely lose interest. Carl Jung left us an extraordinary legacy. He understood something that modern psychology is still trying to assimilate today. You cannot control the toxic people around you. You cannot prevent them from existing, nor can you stop the world from having people who feed on chaos, manipulation, or the pain of others. But there is something you can do, and it is infinitely more powerful. You can become someone that these people instinctively avoid. When you integrate your shadow, when you stop projecting your unhealed wounds, when you develop internal boundaries and learn not to feed the drama, you begin to emit a completely different energy. It's as if you become psychologically invisible to those who are hunting for weaknesses. You start to exist on another level of reality, where there are no emotional cracks for toxic people to enter. They realize that they have nowhere to hold on to, no way to provoke you, no way to manipulate you, and they simply walk away. But the transformation doesn't stop there. Integrating the shadow is not just about repelling toxic people. It is about freeing yourself to live authentically. It is discovering that you do not need anyone's validation to exist. It is feeling an inner peace that does not depend on who praises you or who criticizes you. It is living without fear of your own dark side, because you know it exists, but you also know that you do not have to be governed by it. People who integrate their shadow become magnetic to other healthy, balanced, and mature individuals. Your relationships change. Your professional environment changes. Your energy changes. You stop feeling drained after social interactions. You stop feeling exhausted from trying to maintain masks or control how others perceive you. And you start attracting people who resonate on the same frequency of truth, respect, and depth. Jung said, "That which you resist persists. As long as you fight against your own darkness, it will continue to find ways to manifest and to attract people who will force you to see it. But the moment you decide to integrate that part of yourself, your whole life begins to reorganize. You free yourself from fear, you free yourself from guilt, and you start to experience something that few know, the feeling of being whole." If this video resonated with something in you, if at any moment you thought, "This is what I need," then I want to make you an invitation. Write in the comments what point impacted you the most. Whatever it was, write it down. Putting it into words is also an act of integration. It is bringing the unconscious into consciousness. And if you are not yet subscribed to the channel, subscribe now. Continue this journey. The next video is just as important as this one. See you there.